Where do we draw the line between profit, people, and the planet? Imagine this. You're working in a research lab at a prestigious university and you come across a novel way to administer a drug for combination antifungal therapy. You could make millions by starting a new company and start selling this drug with the highest profit margins. But then a student comes by your office and tells you that your discovery could treat up to 1 million cases every year of a condition called leishmaniasis in low and middle income countries. What do? Dr. Kishor Wasan, a Canadian pharmacologist, pharmacist, and professor, faced this exact dilemma when he and his team discovered a way to orally administer the drug Amphotericin B. And when one of his students approached him about leishmaniasis, he was faced with two choices. Develop this drug at or below cost as a humanitarian effort to treat millions of patients around the world, or make a hefty profit serving a small percentage of patients in high-income countries. Welcome back to another episode of the Global Health Pursuit Podcast, a podcast for beginner learners, seasoned public health professionals, and fans who just love hearing inspiring stories from leaders who want to make the world a better place. My name is Hethel Bauman, and I'm your host. And I still am a little bit sick as I record this intro, but we're going to get through it. As you probably can guess from the title of this episode and the focus of this podcast, Dr. Wasan chose the more difficult but much more fulfilling route of developing this drug with the intention to treat patients with the neglected global disease of leishmaniasis. We'll get into what leishmaniasis is within the episode, but through this effort, he became a founding member and co-director of the University of British Columbia's Neglected Global Diseases Initiative. In this episode, we'll discuss why it's so challenging to raise awareness and funding for neglected diseases, and what young researchers should understand when trying to make an impact in global health. Dr. Wasan is also a current adjunct professor in the Department of Urological Sciences in the Faculty of Medicine at UBC. You can learn more about Dr. Kishor Wasan by visiting the show notes linked in the description of this episode. And I'm so happy to say that this episode is proudly supported by the Neglected Global Disease Initiative at the University of British Columbia. The mission at NGDI UBC is to develop interventions for neglected global diseases and ensure their delivery to those in need. To learn more about NGDI UBC, visit them on the web at ngdi.ubc.ca. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share this with someone who might find it valuable. I'm a one-woman show, and believe it or not, it helps me grow the show to make it 1% better every day. Let's get into it. This is something that I've touched on in the podcast before around neglected global diseases, but in terms of the aspect on global access, this is a new angle. And I think it's really, really important for our listeners to learn about this too, because it's a challenge. I want to learn a little bit more about your journey, because you started off, in the pharmacology space.
Well, let me tell you the journey, because it is a very interesting journey. I sort of fell into this by total mistake, to be quite honest with you, Hatel. I mean, what had happened was, I'm a classic pharmaceutical sciences. I did my pharmacy degree at the University of Texas at Austin. I worked as a retail and hospital pharmacist down in the States for a while, and then did my graduate work at MD Anderson Cancer Center at the University of Texas with Dr. Lopez Berenstein, and we worked on a drug that I've worked on for over 35 years called Amphotericin B, and that's going to be important in this story. And Amphotericin B is a drug that's used in the treatment of bloodborne fungal infections and parasitic infections. And in Dr. Lopez's lab, we created a lipid-based parenteral formulation that ultimately became a drug called Abelset that got to the market. So after my PhD with Dr. Lopez, I postdoced at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio and worked in lipid and lipoprotein metabolism, and then subsequently was recruited to the University of British Columbia in the early 1990s and started my degree at UBC. And so when I started at UBC, I wanted to look at different other aspects. I was in pharmaceutical sciences. We got money from big pharma. A lot of the people in my organization started their own little companies on the side as being professors at the university.
Mm-hmm.
90 some percent of my students end up in working in big pharma. And so I'm a fellow and a member of the American Association of Pharmaceutical Sciences, still am. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was my world. And but my world got turned upside down in the late 1990s. And what happened is the following: is that I was invited to give grand rounds at Vancouver General Hospital, and there was big talk about combination antifungal therapy, and everyone was worried about finding combination therapy for fungal diseases, particularly fungal diseases in patients that were immune compromised, patients that had HIV/AIDS,
Okay.
patients that were uncontrolled diabetics, patients that were cancer patients. But this particular group of infectious disease doctors that were giving grand rounds to on combination therapy for fungal infections were interested in transplant patients. So what would happen is patients
Huh.
that were going to get a lung kidney transplant or some kind of transplant were forced to be immune compromised first so that they wouldn't have organ rejection and then they would have the transplant. But when you made the patient immune compromised, it opened them up to all sorts to opportunistic infections like fungal infections.
Right.
And so these patients would get fungal infections in advance of coming in for their organ transplant. So they used to put them on amphotericin B, but the problem was amphotericin B was given as an intravenous infusion. You had to bring them in the hospital earlier. You had to give them an infusion very slowly, and it wasn't
Mm.
cost effective. The patients had to be in the hospital long before they actually had to have the transplant, and they almost had to preload them so that with the drugs so they didn't get these fungal infections because they were immune compromised. So one of the guys in the back of the
Right.
room, I was giving this talk looking at combination antifungals with amphotericin B to treat these patients because we done this work with these parenteral formulations that we had developed in Dr. Lopez's lab. And a physician at the back of the room says, "Can you develop an oral formulation of amphotericin B, something that's cost effective, that's safe, that's accessible,
Mm-hmm.
that may even be tropically stable so you don't have to worry about refrigeration?" And I gotta be honest with you, Hitel, I thought, I don't think that this is really possible. But I said, okay, we'll try. And as I was driving back from Grand Rounds back to my lab, I get into my lab and I tell my students, I go, "Oh no, here's Quiche again, another crazy idea of trying to develop." And I didn't think it was possible to develop an oral formulation of amphotericin B. The molecular weight of the drug was too large. It was a big molecule. It was hard to absorb.
Uh-huh.
But by chance, we were working with dietary lipids to improve the absorption of drugs. And so we combined basically the idea of amphotericin B with these dietary lipids, and we showed enhanced absorption of oral amphotericin B. And we tested them in our systemic fungal models. So I had animal models for candidiasis, for aspergillus, and so on. And we showed some tremendous effects, that it was very effective without the toxicity associated with AMP B. Amphotericin B has two major big toxicities. One is when you give it as an IV, it causes red blood cell hemolysis, so the patients shiver and chigger and so on. And the other big problem with AMP B
Uh-huh.
is, and the reason why we teach our students it's called amphoterable, is because it's got dose-dependent kidney toxicity. So you have to find a way to keep that kidney tox down. And the lipid-based parenteral formulations do reduce the kidney toxicity, but our oral formulation didn't have the kidney toxicity at the doses where we saw tremendous efficacy in our animal models. So classic pharmaceutical scientist professor that I am, I filed my provisional patent. I was going to make millions of dollars. I was going to go and,
Yeah.
start my own company and do the whole big,
Mm-hmm.
huge thing. And as I filed my patent, we got a little bit of press around this novel discovery and so on. I was in my office one day, and this young first-year medical student, his name was Andrew Gray, came to my office, knocked on the door, and said, "Dr. Wasan, I heard about your oral amphotericin B discovery. Have you thought about using it in treating low and middle income country diseases like leishmaniasis. I looked at him. Leishmaniasis? What the heck is leishmaniasis? So after he left the room, I searched it. And I found out what leishmaniasis was. It was this devastating parasitic disease where this sandfly came along and stung you and released this parasite.
Right.
And it was in huge parts of the world. In back then we used to call it the developing world. Now it's low and middle income countries. In India,
Right.
in Brazil, in Africa, in South America. It was in very, very poor regions of the world where the people were neglected. There were no resources, and the magnitude of the disease, Hatel, was huge. The number of people that had the disease was so much far greater than any resources to treat the disease. So Andrew was saying that maybe your oral amphotericin B, because it is cost effective, it's safe, it's tropically stable, it's accessible, might actually be an important drug to help with therapy for leishmaniasis. So at that point, we started to investigate if this was an issue, and it turned out that it was a big issue. That our therapy might be effective. And after talking to lots of people and connecting the dots and getting to the right folks, we were eventually invited down to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation down in Seattle. And luckily, it was only about a 2-hour drive from Vancouver, so we drove down there. I wanted to get an autograph with Bill and a picture with Melinda. But I got I saw Melinda's office, but she wasn't there. But long story short, the Gates Foundation, through one of their subsidiary groups called the Consortium for Parasitic Drug Development, which was located in Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, led by Dr. Richard Tidwell at the UNC, partner us up with them to work at our oral amphotericin B in their animal models of visceral leishmaniasis. Because we did systemic fungal models, but I didn't know anything about leash at the time. I didn't have the animal models and so on. To make a long story short, we tested it in their formulations, and I got to tell you, the results were fantastic, and there was big excitement, and it's taken us a number of years, but we have now completed Phase 1A, single dose, Phase 1B, multiple dose human safety studies in patients, as well as GLP toxicology with oral amphotericin B. And we're looking at doing Phase 2 and Phase 3 studies around the world. And even to this day, the oral amp B might be another standard of care that can help with the current standards of care. So the reason why I tell you the story, Hatel, is because, you can't make money from this. This has got to be, you've got to develop this so that it at or below cost for this indication, because the people that have got this disease just don't have the economics to buy the product. And you're not trying to make money. This is a humanitarian effort. At that point, and it took us, what I've just described to you took actually basically 8 to 10 years to get to the point. What I've described to you in less than 10 minutes took 8 to 10 years to get to this point.
Right. And I was going to ask you how long.
Yeah.
What was that process like?
We didn't know who to talk to, and it took forever. And as I went through this journey and struggled through this journey, I thought to myself, I wonder if there are other people on campus that are going through similar things, that they're doing great research, maybe in these areas, but don't know who to talk to, don't know where to get the funding, don't know who to partner with. So what we did is I went to my president, President Stephen Toop, and to at that time his VP Research, Dr. John Hepburn, and I said, can I figure out what's going on here? So they gave me a little bit of money and a couple of summer students and said, do an environmental scan across the UBC campus and see what happens. And the byline that I use is, we had neglected people doing neglected disease research all through campus. And we didn't even know it, right under our noses. There were all these people that were doing work in all different areas, not just leishmaniasis, and dengue fever, and African sleeping sickness, people who are trying to develop new standards of care for telemedicine, people who were doing work in sepsis. I mean, it was antimicrobial resistance. But they didn't know where to go. They didn't know where to get their funding. They didn't know who to partner with in LMICs to get their technologies to the people in need. And so that's why we started the Neglected Global Diseases Initiative at UBC. And this was co-founded by myself and my colleague, Dr. Bob Hancock. Bob is a world-renowned microbiologist who's done phenomenal work in sepsis for many years. He's one of the top microbiologists in the world. Scholar GPS just did some rankings, and he's one of the top people ranked in the world in this area. And so Bob and I, through the support, we didn't get much support from UBC, a little bit. We got the little bit of support. We started NGDI back in 2009, 2010. And the whole point of NGDI, Hital, was to do two major things. Number one is to mobilize these neglected people walking around the campus, all right, who are doing this amazing neglected disease research, and give them a voice, give them a place that they can talk about their work, talk about what they need in terms of resources, partner them with the right people in LMICs so that they can move their technology from where it is in the ivory tower of the university to make a difference on the ground. And the second mission was to get students engaged, get the next generation. I'm an old 60-some-year-old man now, and really, I got to tell you, it's the young new generation that has to take the lead. It's sort of like what's happening in climate change. The same way with NTDs, we need the young people like yourself that need to take on the challenge of moving forward. So we had to get them involved. So that's how NGDI started. It's a long story to where we were. But at that point, I thought to myself, what am I doing, Kish, with my life? Why am I worried about profit and all this sort of thing? Don't I really want to be a professor so I can make a difference in people's lives? Don't I want to make a difference in touching people's lives and making a difference there, as opposed to how many grants I get, how many papers I get, how much grant money I get, how many patents I get, and plus leishmaniasis was a disease, in my mother country of India, and my mother, who's a physician back east in Toronto, was like, finally you did something with your life, Kishor. It's good that you're doing something good now. I mean, you know what Indian mothers are like. I mean, she was just like, you were doing all this fancy stuff, and what were you doing? And so that's how NGDI got started, and that's how we got going with NGDI.
I think that when we last spoke, you were saying, that's not really an easy decision to just say, okay, we're going to transition and do this work in LMICs. And you did mention, like, you were a tenured professor, right? So you had the safety net of being able to do what you wanted to do at that point.
That's a very, 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 very good point. Someone asked me, you're very intuitive. Someone asked me, I did have the luxury by the time we started NGDI, I was already a tenured professor. And we started in 2009, 2010. I got tenure in 2000. If I started, and by the way, this grand rounds that I gave on developing an oral amphotericin B happened at the end of 1999, early 2000. So I wasn't tenured at that point. And so developing an oral formulation of AMP-B for fungal infections and filing my patents and trying to get a company, do the company thing and, whatever, I was still a non-tenured professor, doing that. Someone asked me the question, Kish, would you start at NGDI? Would you have done global access if back in 2000 when you were non-tenured? And the answer is probably not at that time. I probably wouldn't have done any of this because I did not have the safety of that. So the oral amphotericin B is a unique situation, Hital, because we can be Solomon and break the bread, because we can develop oral amphotericin B for systemic fungal infections and make commercialization and money for that. But for parasitic infections like leishmaniasis, we can develop it for that and have it at or below cost for the LMIC indication. So the nice thing about oral AMP-B is actually you could probably do both. And so I could have probably done both and satisfied the things you have to do to get tenure, but also be able to do this humanitarian pursuit. But that's a very unique situation. You're absolutely right. And one of the things that we've tried to do with NGDI is develop mechanisms, and it's actually changed now from 2000, where younger faculty can get involved in this kind of work and document this kind of work, and it counts toward tenure, and they will have a better chance of getting tenure
Mm.
now by doing this kind of work than when I tried over 25 years ago. But you're right, 25 years ago, if I wanted to start NGDI and I was a non-tenured professor, because I've got a young family, I've got to put money on, I've got to put food on the table, I've got to have a livelihood, and they probably wouldn't have counted it back in those days. You're right.
Right.
I probably wouldn't have started NGDI. I mean, it was a little bit easier once I was a tenured professor. But that's actually one of the reasons why we started NGDI. And things have changed where now people, younger faculty, do get credit for doing this kind of work and helps them get toward tenure now. So things have changed, things have gotten better, but not back then. Not back then. So you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I mean, it just speaks to the fact that you're like paving the way for the younger generation. When you first started NGDI, what do you think the biggest like challenges were in terms of raising awareness and even like funding for the diseases that like your colleagues were working on?
Yeah, so there were two main things that were happening back then and still are challenges today, but not as bad. Things have improved. Number one, as the word says, they're neglected diseases, and they
Right.
were in faraway places, at least in people's minds. They were diseases that were of huge, large magnitude that nobody knew about,
Mm-hmm.
nobody talked about, but they were in places like South Sudan or in Bangladesh or in southern parts of South America, in places in the
Mm-hmm.
world that people didn't talk about, people didn't know about, people didn't want to hear about. And so, I mean, the reason why they were called neglected diseases were two main reasons. One, because people didn't know about them, and number two, the proportionality between the magnitude of the disease and the amount of resources put toward those diseases to try to treat them was completely out of whack. I mean, there's completely out of whack. So that was one of the biggest problems, is that people did not know. They did not know about these diseases. They did not want to know. There was no good PR, and they were hidden.
Right.
And that because of that, there were also no mechanisms back then to fund that kind of research. Governments, our Canadian Institutes of Health Research, our NIH, and places like that, and they've gotten better now. But back then, because you're using the taxpayers' money, they want to fund research that affects the taxpayers of the country, rightly
Mm-hmm.
so, of the countries that are funding that work. So they're not going to want to fund work that's a disease that only occurs in an LMIC. And so those
Mm-hmm.
were the two huge challenges. But both of those have changed now for the following reasons. Number one, social media has made a huge difference in getting the word out about these neglected diseases. Our world has shrunk, and everyone now is starting to know
Mm-hmm.
about those diseases. Number one. Number two is these diseases are now showing up in parts of the world, partly because of climate change, that never showed up before. So recently, cutaneous leishmaniasis has now become an epidemic in the United States. It's become a problem. We've known about CL for
Wow.
years in different parts of the world. It's still a huge problem in Ethiopia and South Sudan and in places in India for sure. But now it's started showing up in the southern United States. All of a sudden, the Americans are like, "Whoa, what's this disease?" Now that the disease is showing up on the shores, well, absolutely, there's greater
Yeah.
awareness. The second thing that's happened, this was not true even when NGDI was started in 2009, 2010, Hetal, and that was that there were not funding mechanisms to fund this work. There was no DNDI. There was Gates Foundation was going, but had just got going. There was no EU Horizon Fund. There was no Wright Foundation. There was no other organizations to help fund this kind of work. There are now. There are now, and there are now places that you. In fact, I've got several grant applications going out right now to these
Wow.
organizations. But back in 2009, 2010, Hatel, there wasn't any place to even apply for funding, let alone get money to do the work. And our granting agencies in North America and the West were not supporting this work because in people's eyes, it wasn't affecting the population of the people that they were serving. But that is starting to change. So between social media and the awareness, climate change and the disease now unfortunately tracking to this part of the world, the pandemic, unfortunately, the COVID pandemic has made a big difference. And the sprouting up of these new funding organizations that are funded by combinations of foundation money, government money, philanthropic money, places like the Right Foundation out of Korea, places like Drugs for Neglected Disease Institute initiative out of Geneva, now Horizon and the EU program, and so on and so forth. That has led to potential opportunities to get money, though the competition for those is still extremely high. Less than 10% still get funded.
It's the whole out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. And it's always so interesting because, when you watch TV and these commercials for like charity water come up or like Save the Children, and this is what they have to deal with over there. And now it's happening over here, which is just so crazy. From your work in leishmaniasis, what are some things that have come out from that funding that you've received? Are there any success stories from NGDI?
Well, we've got a lot going on. I mean, ultimate success is, have we made a difference in people's lives in low and middle income countries? Have we changed the standard of care? Have we improved people's health care and so on? I think we're still.
I feel like that's like
the problem is that we're on our way, but it takes years. NGDI, even though started in 2009, 2010, so we're at our 15-year anniversary coming up. You would think that we've made the finish line. No, it's still a work in progress. But I would say we've had the following number of successes. The oral Amphotericin B program, I think, has now finally reached the clinic and is now going to be hopefully in the next year, starting to be in patients. And most importantly, and it took forever, Hital, for this to happen, I finally got us connected to the right people who are now passionate to support the work. So people in Ethiopia, people in Korea, people in Bangladesh, people in Brazil are now showing very big interest in taking our technology and actually trying to use it. So that in itself is a major success because it's not an ivory tower now thing. It's now practical. My colleague, Dr. Richard Lester, has been doing and he's the co-director of NGDI. Rich is an infectious disease physician in Vancouver and at UBC. Rich has developed an organization called WellTel, where he does using telemedicine to improve drug adherence and drug therapy in LMICs, and in particular in Rwanda. And he has made a huge difference in Rwanda, where patients now using telemedicine have been able to get accessibility to drugs, but more importantly, they're actually taking the drugs properly and adhering to drug therapy, and it's making a big difference. And Rich has been doing amazing work there, so he's been very, very successful and has made huge impact. My colleague, Dr. Catherine Hughes, Catherine has been doing work on malaria. Malaria in itself is not a neglected disease, but malaria in patients that have got renal dysfunction is a neglected aspect of malaria. And so she has been working in Africa looking at how to deal with patients who've got renal dysfunction as a function of malaria, and has actually made a big impact there. So she has done tremendous work in that area. My co-founder and colleague, Dr. Bob Hancock, has spurned off companies where he will follow global access principles, where he has now developed what we call peptides to to enhance innate immunity in autoimmune or in immune deficient situations in a number of diseases, particularly in sepsis, which is huge, as well as where he did some seminal work in COVID-19. The other person that's done tremendous work is Dr. David Patrick. So David has been doing amazing work looking at antimicrobial resistance, but particularly the role of asthma and AMR and how that makes a big difference in the developing world. So those are just a number of different examples of people doing work where they've made impact in LMICs and continue to make impact. And I think the other big impact about NGDI, other huge success, is our partnership with Universities Allied for Essential Medicines and the students. We've had a very good ranking from them for years, but our success has been that we've got students that have gone on to start their own careers in this area and are now starting to be the next generation of leaders in essential medicines and global health access and equity, and are now taking the lead from the basically the seeds that we sowed back in 2009 and 2010. So I think the student success and the students going on to do the work that they're doing are great examples of what we've done at NGDI. And there's hopefully more to come.
I absolutely love that. Like, would you say that that's really what makes NGDI different from like other organizations?
Yeah, what I think hopefully differentiates us are really in two areas. Number one, in 2007, the university, through our University Industrial Liaison Office, or our Tech Transfer Office, established global access and equity principles, meaning that if you want to, you can develop your standard of care or your technology at or below cost for an LMIC indication. So it would be cost recovery to develop your new standard of care, your new drug, your new diagnostic, your new approach, but you're not going to make money out of it. It's not going to be a commercialization. It's really cost recovery. I mean, you have to have enough money so it succeeds. I mean, you can't be losing money, but you're not trying to make profit on it either. So in 2007, 2008, UBC was the first in Canada to establish these global health access, and what it's called is actually global access. It's not just in health, but global access and equity principles. You can see them on the UILO website. And we published a paper in 2009 talking about these principles. And in December of this past year, in 2023, in Frontiers of Pharmacology, we just wrote an updated paper on the implementation, the successes, and the challenges of our global access policies and global access and equity and policies and principles and so on. And so I think that's one thing that makes us unique from other organizations, that we have these principles in place and that we've got the opportunity for researchers at UBC to be part of those principles. The people that I've just discussed who are part of NGDI and are doing their works, including our oral AMP as an example, we follow those principles. It's great to have these principles. It's great to have these kind of a framework, but if it isn't being used and you're not actually got things that are using these principles, so what? They're just empty words. Yeah. And so I think that we're very. I think that's what makes us unique. And I think the other thing that makes us a little bit different is that we have a place where we're champions for people's work. It isn't just for people that have already been doing work for a period of time, but it's a way to get new people, if they've got some new technology, to get them excited about their research and think about maybe take their research in a different direction, as what happened to me with oral AMP. Oral AMP was not designed for leishmaniasis and for LMICs. I wasn't thinking about that, as I told at the beginning of this podcast. I mean, the dramatic change and turn, all right, was quite surprising to me. I mean, it really changed my own personal life. Well, we have a lot of people who are maybe doing research for something else that, maybe with NGDI's help and with the facilitation of NGDI and helping them getting the funding and, more importantly, the proper connections to people in LMICs that need that help, they might be able to take their research in a different direction. And finally, it's also a hub for new research, for new people, for new ideas, for students. And I think those are the things that what make NGDI unique and different.
I think that calls, like, it almost is like a call to action for researchers and people who are working in this field to be like, well, how can you use your research to serve patients in low and middle income countries? or even just like, underserved areas. And it's almost like you can just branch out, still do what you're doing, but then also have another branch of like, okay, we're also serving in the humanitarian space as well. Just that, it opens up just another research question.
And it asks the question, so why are universities here? What is our real mission and goal in life? And our goal in life is to educate the next generation of students and next generation of scholars and leaders and people for all walks of life. But it's also to create new research and new ideas, and most importantly, get them disseminated where they can make a difference in mankind. That's what the purpose of universities are. And I think sometimes we've lost that because we've gotten caught into the whole publish or perish, start a company and make money, commercialization. And then those things, I think will always happen. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with all that. But, what our mission at the universities has always been, and I come from a family of university profs. My dad was a university professor. My uncle was a vice president at a university. My mom was a professor. My wife's a professor. I'm a professor, semi supposed to be retired, but I'm not, I guess. And so we grew up in academia and so on. And the main fundamental mission is generating new knowledge and disseminating it to the world so it can make a difference in people's lives. And this is an aspect that with neglected diseases, and this is just a small sliver of a much bigger thing that needed to be addressed. And I think that UBC is trying to lead the way in that pursuit.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that we kind of like lost that like drive or motivation like throughout the years, and you just kind of bring it back. Like, why are you in academia for?
Exactly, and I'm the worst culprit of this. I mean, trust me, I was mostly worried about publish, perish, graduating students, generating lots of money, all right, making a company and winning lots of awards. Okay. I mean, but let me tell you, you might think, well, yeah, I'm a selfish, self-centered man, right? Why am I doing all these things? But part of the reason why is because that's how we were trained, but that's because that's how you get ahead in academia. All right. How many papers did you publish this year? Did you publish in top impact journals? How much grant money did you bring in this year? How many students did you graduate? All right. How many citations to your publications? How much of your technology got picked up by a company? How many awards did you win to show that, what you do, you're at the best? I mean, I'm not being critical of all that. I mean, that's just the way the life is in academia. And I was the worst. I was in that game. I was in that world. That's what I did. I'm proud of my awards. I'm proud of all the grant funding I brought in. I'm proud of all the publications. But at the end of the day, Hatal, I thought to myself, as we started this whole, I actually felt terrible. When I started NGDI, I thought to myself, what am I doing? I'm a self-centered, selfish man here. What am I doing? Why am I really doing this? And it changed my life. I mean, and now we're trying to get others. And the group that we have at NGDI, our leadership team and our advisory board and so on, they all feel the same way, and many of them are super accomplished. But like you said, it's a lot easier for me to say that now as a man in my 60s where, I can do that. When you're in the middle, I've accomplished all the things and I've got all the, all the titles and stuff and, the security of the job. For a lot of younger people, that's hard to do. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, because that's the framework that's been set up by the university in order for you to get ahead. So, I mean, we've got to change that because, again, what is the reason why we're at universities is to, again, create new knowledge, disseminate it, and get it out where we make a difference in people's lives. That's what it's all about. And the university is a great place. I will never change my life with the university. It's been a great place to work. I have been blessed to be at the university and to have the life that I've lived. Teaching, I love the students I've had. I've had thousands of students I've taught over the years. I've had great students, graduate students and undergraduate students in my lab and other trainees, great faculty to work with. And, I get paid to create new knowledge. I mean, what a great job. What could
What
be
could be
better?
better,
It's been a
right?
wonderful life. But I think at
Yeah.
the end of the day, for me, what happened was I went, did I make a difference? And I realized that until we started NGDI, maybe I didn't have my eye on the ball like maybe I should have. And so this is just another way to look at it. And I'm not critical of what other people are doing
Mhm.
for other things, because that's not true. I'm just saying this is a different way to look at this and a different approach. That's all.
Yeah, we can always look back and just say hindsight is 2020, right? So looking forward, so UBC created those global access principles. I want to hear your perspective in terms of like what challenges you see in the future in expanding the impact of these principles at not just UBC and then also like, beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I think there are two things that are happening. And in fact, I'll throw in a shout out for a workshop that we're going to do in March of 2025 with Canadian universities and other nonprofit organizations and NGOs and other organizations across campus, where we're going to talk about global health access and equity principles, what's happening across Canada at all the major universities, what successes they've had, but what are some of their challenges, and how can we overcome the challenges as a collective. And so we're putting a workshop together for that March 2025. We've got support from MSF Canada, from the Medicines Patent Pool, UAM, and our great friend Justin will be there as well,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. So that's one thing that we're trying to do moving forward, is take what we've done at UBC and see what's happening across Canada and see if we can expand to what's happening across Canada. And there are stuff going on at other universities as good, maybe even better than what we're doing at UBC. We're not alone. We'd be foolish to say that we're the best and no one else is doing this. That's not true. There's several universities. McGill's got an amazing global health program. U of T is doing amazing things. There are other organizations that are doing that and other universities doing outstanding stuff. But let's bring all our groups together and see if we can do something more on a Canadian level and make
Mhm.
awareness to the federal government and for people across the country. But the thing inside of UBC and the challenges for UBC in the future in NGDI is we've got to get the message out, continue to get the message out internally to what we do and how we can facilitate support and help these people get support and get some successes for them. I mean, the way researchers and academia work is they only join on when they see that there's potential for success. And
Right.
so we've got to continue to push. You asked that great question. Give me examples, Keish, of all the successes you've had. And a lot of our stuff is still a work in
Mhm.
progress. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think oral AMP is important. If we can be successful with oral AMP, I think that will open the door for all the other things that we're doing. I think we have to highlight what we've already been successful on. Drug-resistant
Mhm.
tuberculosis is a big issue. We've got some top people at UBC doing work in that area. We got to unlock that, get that out there. More around telemedicine and telehealth, more around the adjuvant work and vaccine work that we're doing, etc. So I think the future challenge for NGDI is really, number one, is to get our mission and our work out, what we're trying to achieve, to the UBC community so they can buy in more, and then get some more successes so that they can see that we're not just a paper tiger, that we actually are. It can't. If you work with us, we can lead to success. And what does success look like? Success looks like your
Yeah.
technology, your work is actually being disseminated and actually being used on the ground in an
Right.
LMIC and is actually making a difference in people's lives. That to me is a success. All right. And our work that's sitting in our ivory tower is now getting out and making a difference in people's lives. So that's really the challenge moving forward, I think, in terms of for UBC, and that will expand the global access principles and will have impact because we're seeing that success.
How close do you think you are to something like AMP B being administrated on the ground?
If we can get the funding in the next 12 months, the funding is for phase two clinical trials. So that is efficacy studies in patients on the ground. So we're close. We're very close. And the most important thing
Wow.
is I've got now groups around the world that have believed my data finally. It's taken forever, that believe the animal data, believe the GLP toxicology data, and believe our phase 1 data to say, okay, I think now it's worth to take a shot in actual patients that are sick with the disease. We have everything lined up.
Yeah.
The two challenges we had to tell is convincing people that the work that we'd done was strong enough scientifically to move forward. And number two, finding the right
Mhm.
partners and the right people who are willing to champion it. And let me tell you what I'm doing for this work. I am now passing off the technology to those people to be the champions. I'm behind the scenes. I don't have
Yeah.
to be the front of the line for those phase 2 clinical studies. I'm part of the team, obviously, because it's our technology, but I'm letting other people be the leads on these grants, be the leads on these programs. Not us, not me. Doesn't have to be me. Okay? Because I want somebody else to champion the work so that the technology can actually be used in treating patients. So the answer to your question is we're now very close. If I can get the funding in the next 12 months and get patients treated, and if it works in a phase 2, if it actually works in a small group of patients, then it explodes. Then you're
Wow.
talking about thousands of patients. But we just got to get that first phase 2 proper clinical study done in an environment with people who are sick with the disease. And if we can get the money, and actually we've got the team and the sites where we're going to do the work. We now just need the cash to do the work. So yeah, we're pretty close now.
That's amazing. That's so awesome and so exciting.
And we're going to do it at or below cost.
Yes.
I don't want to make profit on this. I mean, my wife and I can make profit from our technology. We could start our own company and make profit.
Yeah.
Systemic fungal infections and oral AMPI, there's a need, okay? But for VL, no. We are going to follow global access principles. We're going to follow the principles of UAM. Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. If I be a hypocrite. And I've been wanting to do this for 20 years. And it's taken us the pandemic. We lost time during the pandemic. Our
Right.
phase 1 studies were being done just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit and shut everything down. It took me during the pandemic. We wrote up the results and published the papers from the phase 1, but we couldn't get the phase 2 started because it was during the pandemic. No new phase 2 studies were being approved around the world. Current ones are being used, but it was very difficult. Only now are we coming out of the pandemic finally, and now there's again momentum. So we did lose some time because of the pandemic. But interesting enough, we thought that maybe there would be new therapies, better therapies for leishmaniasis than what we had to offer, so we thought we had missed the boat. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and our oral AMP still can be a player, I think, and still can be important. So
Hmm.
we're close. Cross our fingers. Let's hope for the best.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ah. Okay. I'm so excited for you guys. What advice would you give to like younger students, maybe in like universities who want to make a difference in this space but don't really know how to? I feel like the global health space is it's hard to navigate.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Like, what's the definition of global health? We could have
Right.
a whole 2 podcasts just on that, and I'm sure you have
Exactly.
with top people in the area in this field.
Hmm.
It is a minefield, but I would give my advice to the students in the following way. By the way, the other fund that I forgot about is the GHIT fund out of Japan. That's another global health fund that funds work as well as the Wright Foundation. So I need to give them a shout out as well. So students have a better opportunity now than ever than when I was a young assistant professor, and certainly when I was a student back in the early 90s, in that there are organizations and groups and places that students can go to get involved. I mean, and thank to the pros of the internet and the pros of social media. And even though we
Yeah.
talk about the cons all the time, there are big pros, and the pros are there are lots of organizations that you can get involved in as a student. So a lot of one of the reasons why NGDI actually got going is actually because of the local UAM student chapter. That chapter was outstanding. Outstanding. I mean, they were advocates for essential medicines. They were very active. There were students from all over campus. They inspired us more than we inspired them.
Mm.
I mean, and so the answer to your question is what students need to do is global health is so large. So pick a subset of global health, pick an
Yeah.
aspect. All right, focus your aspect that you're interested in. It doesn't matter what aspect it is. It could be, child and maternal health. It could be neglected tropical diseases. It could be telemedicine. It doesn't matter. So first thing you need to do is, because if you try to go into global health, the thing is so bloody large. And, what's the definition of global health? Everything is global health, right? I
Yeah.
mean, anything that has to do
Mm-hmm.
with health is global health, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, you have to decide what is your subspecialty that you want to focus in on, number one. Then number two is then look up organizations that are either at your university, but more importantly, that are around the globe that
Yeah.
you as a student can join. Join UAM as if you're involved in essential medicines and want to reduce drug costs. Get involved with Doctors Without Borders Canada or MSF if you want to, get to know some of the student groups inside of MSF if you want to do that there. There are so many opportunities, but you just have to, first identify your niche and what your focus and interest is, and then plug in to what those organizations might be. And if they're not at your university, so what? Join virtually. Get involved with a chat group. Get involved with a bigger group. I never had that opportunity. That wasn't available to me 20 some years ago. We didn't have those kinds of things. We were isolated. But now you have that opportunity. That would be what I would say to students. The other thing is, and this is why NGDI is important, one of the biggest frustrations we always had, and I still had it until very recently with the oral AMP stories, I wasn't sure who was the right people to connect with at WHO, at DNDI, at these other organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to lots of different groups that they were the wrong people to talk to about their excitement about our work. It took me the whole pandemic. I used the whole 2.5 years that we were shut down, basically on Zoom calls and being virtual, to finally get to the right people who could get me to the right audience to talk about our work. So the biggest trick is you've got to get to the right people who will connect you to the kind of things you're passionate about.
Yeah.
So you have to do that. You have to do that homework. But that's where your university professors and people help out. So what you want to do as a student is, if you say, hey, I'm interested in neglected tropical diseases, and I just throw that as an example,
Mm-hmm.
look up who is doing that work on campus and connect with them and see if they know people who you can connect with. So I do that all the time. Students ask me about, who could I work with in this area? And that's one of the best parts of my job, is I facilitate connecting people with people who might be the right people for what they're interested in.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay? So that's my advice to students, is find a focused passion within that big conglomerate called global health, and then zero in on that passion by looking at who you could talk to on your campus and through the internet, through the world. That, there's LinkedIn, there's Twitter X, there's all these different things that will get you to the right folks that you need to talk to, that might get you a chance to get you into an organization, get you into a student group, get you into a group into a community that then you can start to do the things that you're interested in. So that would be my answer. But that opportunity is now there where it wasn't 25 years ago. And so,
Right.
We're building on the shoulders of all these folks, and thank the Lord we have these organizations, and I admire them all. They've been fantastic to provide those opportunities for students.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Wasan. This was an awesome conversation. I learned so much.
Well, I hope that this gives your audience an understanding of what we're trying to do, how we got to where we were, and more importantly, what we need to do in the future. And I would say, from our perspective, how institutions can solve global health disparities, I think, by working in partnership with other organizations as a team.
Yeah.
You need to get with the global health funders, the global health institutions that are on the ground, the NGOs that are on the ground, and the people who are actually going to do the work on the ground, the PIs on the ground, and you connect them all together to do that. So as I said, the projects that I'm now spending grants for, I've got 2 grant applications that are going in. One we just submitted. It was partnerships between a Korean organization, a UBC organization, a UK organization, and an Ethiopian organization.
Wow, that's so cool.
All right. And I've got another one where I've got people from Kenya, Ethiopia, UK, Scotland, Canada, and Brazil. So, but that took us 2 years to put that team together and the right people. And even then, the team isn't actually working yet. We're now finally have agreed that we're going to work together. We've put the plan together, and now we're going to try to get the funding to do the project. And everybody has got a different piece. So that is how institutions like UBC and universities can play a more active role in solving global health disparities. You've got to work in partnership with colleagues in LMICs. And it has to be an equal partnership. You can't tell them what to do. In fact, they tell you what to do.
Right.
They're the ones that face the problem. And they say, hey, this is how we need to treat the patients. This is the challenges, the logistic challenges that we face. You don't tell them. In fact, they're smarter than we are because they face those challenges on a daily basis. Every day, face to face. And so that mindset is what's got to change. And I mean, it's been wonderful. I've learned so much from my LMIC partners and from my global health partners. I mean, you might think I'm a smarty pants. I'm not that smart. I've learned from them.
I think you're a smarty pants.
Yeah, they have taught me, the things that I've mentioned today has come from them facing it on the ground. So I thank you so very much for giving us the opportunity to speak in your podcast. We look forward to it being disseminated, and NGDI UBC thanks you. And let's hope that this leads to more people getting interested in neglected global diseases.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic and guest, head over to the show notes linked in the description of this episode. There, you can get access to resources, links, and ways you can get involved in the pursuit for global health. And if you loved this episode, don't forget to write me a review on Apple Podcasts and rate the podcast on Spotify. It helps me get in front of more people just like you and continues to elevate the causes we are so passionate about. I'll see you in the next one.